welcome to our presentation today. So we're going to be talking about exploring solar opportunities in Haverford Township. And so this is just a general overview of what we'll be talking about today. We'll start briefly with an introduction about our program and tying to Germany that sort of inspired this whole project. Then we'll get into the actual looking at the township and the social benefits of solar for the township. Then we'll switch over to our two case studies of most exciting possibilities, those being the CREC, the Community Recreation and Environmental Center, and the Stadium ice skating rink. After that, we'll look at the financing structures of the CREC and the stadium, and really looking at these two main funding structures of township ownership versus a power purchasing agreement, which we'll get into much more later on. Finally, we'll finish up looking to the future and exploring some exciting things that are happening in Harrisburg that really could propel this to another level. Great. So now just a bit of background about us and where we're coming from. Sam and I were students in the Climate Change 360 program this semester. And so to all those who don't know what the 360 is, it is a cluster of 3 classes where all 3 classes are sort of taught connecting one another, and all 3 classes have the same students. So Victor was one professor in that cluster. He taught us a sustainability statistics course. Carol Hager was another professor, and she taught our politics of climate change course. And Bob, who couldn't be here today, was our 3rd professor, and he taught the philosophy course. So the main theme of our 360 program was climate change, and it really centered around this case study of Freiburg, Germany, the green capital of Europe, many have dubbed it. And we really took a lot of time investigating Freiburg, looking at how it was so innovative. We were actually scheduled to go to Freiburg until COVID hit, but it still was heavily interwoven into our coursework, and really is what drew us to look more into community solar at the more tangible level in the Haverford Township.
Okay, so Germany was an inspiration for this project because of the way that they promote solar. They have legislation in place that makes it easy for private individuals to buy shares of renewable energy. And this is a major reason why electricity production comes from renewables. And you'll see that in the left figure. And so we'll also discuss how investing in community solar is a safe option for individuals because the average dividend is 3.43%, which is higher than traditional savings accounts. So that also encourages investment. And as for municipality and public institution participation in cooperative energy in Germany, you'll see that it's less. It's represented in the right figure as that other 1%. It's just a small sliver of that 2016 installed renewable power generation. And this is because most of them choose to rent out public lands and rooftops for community solar projects to take place on, rather than participating in them themselves. And so this is really different from US models in which municipalities and public institutions participate at a far higher rate than their German counterparts. And so we'll look into the legislation a little bit of why that is a little later on in this presentation.
This is Rob Graff. If I can just ask what the protocol that you would like for receiving questions. Should we put them in the chat or?
Yeah, why don't you put it in the chat and I will kind of moderate.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll also have questions at the end too. Thanks, Rob.
Awesome. Great. So alongside the German case study that we undertook, we also, our 360 lined up well in that Bryn Mawr College is also sort of planning its next step in its master plan for achieving carbon neutrality. And part of this process involved this crowdsourcing exercise with students, where they invited a bunch of students to come to a presentation they gave about what their plan was going forward, and they wanted to gauge what students thought about it. And so if you look in the bottom left of this slide, you'll see the responses that students gave to what they found as the key components of what they thought should be the key components of the carbon master plan. And so you'll see that unsurprisingly, effectiveness was number one. If you want to achieve carbon reduction, of course, effectiveness needs to be number one. But what's especially interesting for us is that while effectiveness was important and is important, there are other positive impacts cared about and wanted to ensure were part of the master plan. So among these were visibility, unintended consequences, additionality, additional benefits, and geographical relevance. Applying these to the Haverford Township case study, we really think that it really resonates with what we're trying to convince the township to do. So we know right now that the township is sourcing its energy from offsets, but these offsets are very much untangible, and they're really hard to visualize for someone who's in the township. And I think people in the township would agree with students that the students took this survey that visibility and geographic relevance are also very important. So that's sort of what brought us here today too. Great. So with that background in mind, we're now going to switch over to the social benefits of solar for the township.
So solar would really further the momentum that the township is building through the Sierra Club Rating for 100 campaign that you all know about, and completing the clean energy aspect of the Rec Center. As you know, or may know, solar, the roof was intended for solar, and that is why it's so ideal, as you'll see later in the presentation. And it also builds off the momentum built from other programs such as the Rain Garden, the township's climate action plan, the program to install LED streetlights. And so solar would be a very important aspect of achieving a lot of the goals of the township.
Great. And sort of building off what Sam said, there are other community engagement considerations that really make solar an exciting possibility for the township. Among those is the opportunity for community voices and businesses to play a key part in this planning process. So as we'll dive into later in our presentation, both funding structures really have a strong community component involved. And it really is an exciting opportunity to engage local businesses and community members. And that sort of ties into the fundraising opportunities, which we'll dive into greater detail later. And then another prong of this is strengthening community pride and interest in solar. So Haverford has already sort of established itself as this environmental leader with the CREC, which is an amazing architectural and just community building to have. I wish my town had that. But solar could really take it a step further in that it could lead to more at-home action too. So before our meeting today, we met with a solar consultant who told us plain and simple that our customers are our best marketers. And we think this is also an exciting pitch for the township, especially at the Rec Center where people are coming in and out all the time, and the panels would be incredibly visible because of the pitch of the roof. And it's just a great way for community members to engage with it. And especially if you decide to put the panels in, they could put in a TV in the lobby that would display the metrics of the panel in live time. Just so it's a great engagement opportunity in that sense. Another interesting avenue of this would be working with local students. So there could be an interactive aspect of the solar installation, like the TV I said, maybe doing some sort of math problems with it, stuff like that. So, and there's also a bunch of different ways that students could engage with it. And then finally, this is pretty obvious, but promoting local business. This is a very capital intensive project, and it would be, the money would be ideally directed towards community businesses.
So this slide is targeted at applying a financial value to some of the intangible benefits from local solar energy production. And so the two projects combined reduce CO2 equivalent emissions by 187 metric tons a year, which is similar to moving 41 cars from the road per year. And so, and the social cost of savings is $11,000 a year. And so social cost is calculated by the damage caused by CO2 emissions to industry, agriculture, health, and communities. And so, as you can see, like there are some financial incentives to these social benefits.
Great. So with that social component discussed, now we're going to turn our attention to looking at the actual solar capacity of the CREC and the Scadium. And as we'll see, they're actually ideal sites for solar, which is very exciting. So background into the CREC Center and why we chose it as an ideal site. I'll first hand it over to Victor, who will talk about another iteration of the 360 program that really helped shape the CREC.
So Bryn Mawr College has some history working with the CREC. In 2010, 2011, Commissioner Steve D'Amelio asked about possibilities of putting different types of renewable energy into the CREC, which had not yet had its plans finalized or construction began. And he asked my math students to look into this possibility, and they looked into wind, which turned out not to be a very good option for this part of Pennsylvania, solar, which we could have added later, which is what we're looking at now, but they also looked into the possibility of the geothermal system and ended up recommending, when they gave their final exam, which was a presentation to the commissioners, that that would be both cost-wise and environmental-wise a good choice for the township. And we were very excited at the end of that process that the commissioners voted unanimously to go with the geothermal system. It would cost an extra $600,000, but would save roughly $50,000 a year in energy costs over a traditional heating and cooling system. And the commissioner said, this is a historic day for Haverford Township in making that decision, which I viewed as kind of deciding to move in a more innovative and forward-looking way than maybe we've done in the past. And these ideas of making Haverford Township carbon neutral are moving in that same direction. After that plan was approved, some of the other students worked with Tim Denny and the rec department to get a $300,000 grant from the Department of Energy to help pay for the geothermal system, which we've estimated to save over $2 million in energy costs over the lifetime. So at Bryn Mawr, we feel a close connection to the CREC, which is why we're particularly excited to look into this solar option.
Great. And so as Victor was sort of mentioning, this CREC Center is really a center of green initiative. And so this is tied with its LEED Gold certification, its geothermal heating and cooling, where Bryn Mawr students played a big role in that. And it's sort of structure as an environmental education center. So in that way, we see the solar panels as an excellent complement to these already happening initiatives. Another way that these solar panels align well with the CREC is in its mission statement. So this is just pulled from the mission statement itself. And so the mission of the CREC is to create a healthier environment and healthier individuals through education and programs. We believe that the health of our community is directly related to the quality of our air, water, and open spaces, as well as the food we eat, the condition of our bodies, and how we think. So solar panels really, I mean, they exemplify this sort of mantra in that it would be this excellent education tool, and it would also be this excellent tool of a healthier environment and true clean energy on site, visible to the community, and an example for the community. So that's another exciting overlay we see.
So I'll jump in here now. My company, Independent Solar, was actually able to run an analysis on the CREC building using a software called Helioscope, which gives us a very granular look at the insulation and also an optimized layout for solar panels. And this is generally used to create ultimate plans for building these projects, and it's thought of as highly reputable and accurate in the industry. And what we see here, judging by the scale on the left, with green being the best insulation and red being the worst, is that this roof, aside from a few panels on field segment 3, has an incredibly good insulation profile, close to 100%, which is really quite fantastic, and certainly meets any barometer we might have for viability. Kind of jumping now to some figures generated from the analysis. We believe we could fit 516 panels on the roof, yielding a capacity of 206 kilowatts. And this would lead to an estimated annual generation of 252,000 kilowatt hours, give or take. And that's equivalent to roughly 23 homes, which is quite significant. And again, 98.8% solar access rating. That has to do with the shading profile, and that's really quite phenomenal. And then on the left, we were able to kind of cross-reference the estimated solar generation with the total CREC energy usage. And, you know, per our calculations, this system could meet roughly 40% of the CREC's energy usage, which is, again, really quite fantastic.
Which is which, Jeremy? Which is the energy use and which is the energy creation?
Sure. So blue, per the key, is energy used, and orange is estimated solar potential. And as you can see, it fluctuates depending on the time of year. So summer is going to have the best solar yields. Meanwhile, winter is a bit less.
So moving on to the stadium, which is our second site, we weren't able to do quite the same treatment as we did to the CREC, but we were able to use the information that we received from Solarize and apply that to the stadium. So you can see that the stadium has a pretty clean roof, and it has about 28,000 square feet that's available. And so we'll pass it on to Jeremy as we look at shading of the stadium.
So we were able to generate this video, which is loading, awesome. And you know, what we're seeing here is a roof with, again, a really strong shading profile. Obviously, we weren't able to run it through the Helioscope software, but not only is it a very well-insulated roof, but it also has minimal obstruction. And that's generally what we look for with a solar installation. It appears to be a newer roof, which is also fantastic. And the orientation of the roof is such that the trees, I guess to the south of it, would have a negligible impact on the shading profile. And so we also feel this could be a really viable installation possibility.
The trees are to the north, sorry.
I bet.
Either way, exciting.
Okay, so jumping to the calculated figures here, you know, per our slightly rougher calculations, you know, keep in mind this was not using Helioscope. We would be able to fit, you know, maybe 660 solar panels at 400 watts each. And, you know, roughly that's, you know, a 260 kilowatt capacity. Again, these numbers are definitely more estimates. And again, there's minimal to no shading, and that would, you know, that would render us an annual capacity of upwards of 320,000 kilowatt hours, which is quite fantastic and a little bit bigger than the CREC. So yeah, we have two projects here that could be a really good fit for commercial solar.
Great. So with the capacity, as we see, is very doable and very practical. We'll now turn our attention to the financing structures that are possible for the CREC and the stadium and their installations. So in the commercial solar industry, there's really two main types of ownership structures that could be applicable to the CREC and stadium rooftops. So the first structure is your traditional ownership structure, where the township would purchase the panels, pay for the installation, and be in charge of maintenance of the panels. And then we have a more nuanced and complex structure of a third-party power purchasing agreement, which we'll get into a little bit later and how that works. So looking first at the town ownership structure, we'll see that it's pretty straightforward. So the township would foot the entire cost of the installation and the lifetime maintenance cost of the panels. The township, of course, then would own the panels and all the energy they created. The downside to this approach is that the township would not receive the federal tax credit that's available for solar installations, because it's only reserved for tax-paying entities. And so the reason why you see two numbers here is that that tax credit is changing next year. So currently in 2020, the tax rate is at 26% of a reduction. whereas in 2021, it'll be 22%. So there's a bit of a ticking clock on solar installation, and there's a 4% difference, but we'll get more into that later. Because of this, because you don't receive the tax credit, it is a less common approach for municipal arrays. Power purchasing agreements are a lot more common, and we'll talk about that later. But an added benefit of owning the panels is that the township would receive the solar renewable energy credits or certificates for the value of the energy they created. So essentially, Pennsylvania pays solar installations for the energy they produce, and this is what the credits are. So they're about 3.5 cents per kilowatt that the owner of the array would automatically receive. So that's a big financial consideration, and it's something the township would receive under this ownership structure. Cool. I guess I'll introduce the costs for owning the panels and paying for it. So on the CREC Center, the total estimated capital cost for solar panel installation, using the industry standard of about $2,000 per kilowatt hour of capacity for this 200 kilowatt array, we see that it would cost around $400,000 for this installation, with also an expected yearly maintenance cost of about $2,000 per year.
Okay, so this slide kind of shows a sensitivity analysis for the CREC roof. So if we start by looking over at the 6.5 cents, if you're currently paying about 6.5 cents for electricity for the CREC, your electricity savings by switching to solar panels will be about $16,000 a year. And then the SREC value, it would be about almost $9,000 at about 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's how much you would get back. So your total yearly savings would be about $23,000, and ultimately your estimated payback period would be about 18 years. If you look at the 8 cents, if you're currently spending 8 cents on electricity per kilowatt hour, your savings by switching to solar panels would be almost $20,000, will be above $20,000 estimated. And the SREC value is the same, about $9,000. So your total yearly savings we estimate would be about $29,000. And you can see that the payback period is less, 15 years. So you can see how even the slight difference in how much you're paying for electricity now can affect how effective these solar panels will be towards reducing your bill. So the cost for the stadium, the total estimated capital cost for the solar panel installation for the stadium, we estimate to be about $526,000. Note that the stadium is, we estimated that we extrapolated off of the CREC Center, so that it's a little less accurate, but we also expect about $2,000 for the maintenance costs per year. And once again, for the sensitivity analysis for a stadium, you can see if electricity is costing 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, your electricity savings will be about $21,000. And the SREC value is going to be higher because the stadium roof is bigger. So estimate that the SREC value would be about $11,000. So combining those two, your total yearly savings would be about $30,000 and have a payback period about 17.5 years. With 8 cents, your electricity savings will be even higher. So your total yearly savings will be about $35,000 and your estimated payback period would be about 15 years.
Great. So now we're going to switch our attention over to the second sort of ownership structure that's possible for the township, and this is a power purchasing agreement ownership, and I'll let Jeremy explain it in greater detail.
Yeah, so jumping now to the PPAs, this diverges pretty distinctly from a traditional ownership model. With a PPA, you essentially have a third party that comes in to invest in the project, and they pay for all aspects of development and maintenance. And, you know, to answer your question, Robert, this is the way that an institution can take advantage of the federal investment tax credit for solar projects.
It's not the only way. It's a way, but they could also take by leasing to buy, like towns do with electric vehicles. They lease to buy for a year, get the full tax credit for that, and then they own them for the rest of the time. That's a third model. So this is not the model I'm discussing.
Understood. Great. So yeah, and we hadn't considered that third option. So we're happy to kind of discuss that further near the end of the presentation. But anyway, the advantage here is that there's no upfront cost for the township. So the township would essentially purchase the energy generated, you know, from the investor or group of investors that would own the project, and that price would be fixed, and hopefully it would be fixed at, you know, either a comparable or even lower rate than the township is currently paying for electricity. I'll also note that around 90% of institutional solar projects do come about in the form of a PPA agreement. So kind of reviewing things, there's no install or maintenance cost here. And, you know, the township wouldn't directly own the panels, but nonetheless, you're really taking a lot of burden financially off of the township by going with this approach. And it really does decrease risk. Just, you know, considering the township is again, not really the owner of the project. And we also see there being potential for community members, whether that be, you know, 1, 2, or 3, maybe wealthy donors that decide to buy into the project. You know, there could be a situation where, you know, members are these investors, and maybe they would be willing to accept, you know, marginally lower financial returns in return for lower energy prices. And this, of course, can get somewhat complex, and I'll throw in that a company like Independent Solar is well versed in PPAs and would be more than equipped to kind of handle this sort of agreement.
Okay, so we're going to look to the future because there's currently 2 bills in Harrisburg that could drastically change the finances that we just laid out for you. And so I want to start off by sort of defining what community solar is, and it's where individuals fund a project. So, and they can do that by either buying individual solar panels or paying for a percentage of energy produced by the project itself. And oftentimes community solar legislation prevents one investor from owning more than 50% of a project. So it makes it possible for residents to have a little more input and control over their energy usage. And right now, 20 states currently have legislature promoting community solar. So there is a growing movement for community. As we'll see, Pennsylvania is left out of this map. And I'd like to highlight Minnesota, which has among the best legislation for community solar. And it's because there are no project caps, and they do have additional adders of 1.5 cents per kilowatt compensation for residential projects, because they want to make it enticing for residents to produce their own energy. And so the 2 bills sitting in Harrisburg are concerned about these community solar and the values of SRECs. And you'll notice that they're currently very low, sitting at 3.5 cents. Whereas if you look over to New Jersey, it's at a higher rate. And I'll sort of discuss that a little bit in the following slides. But the low cost of these tradable credits mean that the return on investment for third-party investors isn't as enticing as it would be for projects in New Jersey. And so the low cost of SRECs is primarily caused by Pennsylvania not really investing in solar and renewable energy. And so that's why they keep it so low. And so when SRECs are priced at a higher value, community solar supported, more investors are likely to take up solar projects, and there will be a growing movement of solar in the state. And then this gives individuals the chance to make a difference and have control over their electricity production and grow renewable energy in the state. And so continuing on with this SREX in PA, the current price is 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And you compare it to New Jersey, where the value is 27 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a massive difference. And if we have some time left over, we could plug in those numbers into a spreadsheet that Sophie made that you guys can use. And you can see how that drastically alters payback period and return on investment. And so increasing the price would increase the profits for third-party investors, which would in turn make it a lower fixed cost for the purchaser in a PPA. So right now we're predicting maybe like a 5 or 6 cent per kilowatt price in a PPA, but that could potentially be anywhere from 4 to 6 cents if this bill increasing the value of SREX were to pass. And it's also important to keep in mind that tax credits for solar projects end in 2022. And so waiting for this bill to pass may alter these calculations and change how investors view potential projects. And so returning to community solar, increased SREC values would benefit the community solar projects because residents who are now paying 13 cents per kilowatt hour would see a bigger decrease in their electricity bill than the township would. And so maybe the township could support community residential investment in community agriculture or in community solar production by leasing out their roofs and public lands. And in other models, an average price per year was about $5,000 to $10,000 per roof. And so strong community engagement could facilitate the extra work necessary for community solar. And community solar does take some extra work, just because it takes work to make sure that everybody who's involved in investing in a project is informed, the bills are dispersed correctly. And having a community champion is vital to making sure that these projects are successful. And Haverford Township seems to have some of these champions ready and able to put the time in and invest in community solar. And so it'd be exciting to see if these bills were to pass, what the future would bring. And in conclusion, solar energy is an exciting and realistic opportunity in Haverford Township. The benefits of solar extend far beyond their financial savings for the township, and you can see that in continuing the township's green initiatives, meeting the Sierra Club commitments that the township has made. And there's also opportunities for community engagement and fundraising opportunities that could assist in the costs of installation. And it also supports local businesses, which is vital to supporting local economies. And as we've discussed, that there are two options, and there are potentially more, but we explored two options, which are the ownership of panels versus a power purchasing agreement. And potential community solar and SREC legislation can help further the investment in solar in this township. So I'm sure you have a ton of questions that we could answer.
Great, thank you. I've been following the questions people have been asking in the chat, and a couple of them have to do with the payback time in different situations. So Sophia, could you share your Excel and explain how it goes, and then we'll try some of these numbers that people asked about.
Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick. Okay, so this is a spreadsheet that I made for the CREC. I made a similar one for the Scadium. So it's pretty much, we built it so we put in our estimates and then it updates automatically. So as you get more accurate numbers, or you want to change to see how things affect the values, that's definitely possible. So we estimated a cost of $2 per watt. That was from a meeting with Independent Solar. And then the solar panels we were using are about 400 watts, and for the CREC, got about 516, not about, we got 516 solar panels, which would give a capital cost of about 412,000. And then you can also see here that every month you would make on average about 21,000 kilowatt hours. And we estimated here, it would be you're currently paying 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And you can see that the net savings is about 23,000. The payback period is almost 18 years. But if we change it to 8 cents, the payback period goes down to 15 years and your savings go up.
So what Robert asked, he looked up that in Germany, the cost of electricity is about 26 cents a kilowatt hour. So what would our payback be with that rate?
It would be like so this pretty much just shows that like the more you're currently paying, the more savings you'll get from not paying that much for your electricity.
Could you go back to the 8 cents, which is what I think the township is now paying? And the 6.5 was kind of an estimate of what they might do. But if these SREC values, which now in Pennsylvania only 3.5 cents, if we had the New Jersey rate, which I think was about 21 cents, how would that change the payback value?
Yeah, so this is the SREC estimate right here. Right now, you can see we're using 3.5 cents. But if was it like 21 cents for New Jersey? The payback period would be like also like 6 years. So I'll put it back to you. So pretty much this tool is mainly for you, and it helped us with all of our estimates, but as things change, as like things are tending to do right now, you can keep updating this to get more and more accurate estimates. Also did a tab for the PPA. So once again, the capital cost will be about 413,000. We incorporated the tax credit here. So for 2020, it's 26%. So this is how much it would cost if you got a third party to do it this year. This doesn't really affect you so much. This is more what affects you. So without the PPA, this is how much you'd be spending on the electricity per year that the solar panels would generate. And then with the PPA, this would be your electricity bill. So the difference is about $5,000 a year with the PPA. Yeah, and I did a similar thing with the stadium, which has like pretty similar. Well,
can I just ask a quick question about those cost per kilowatt hour rates with the PPA and without the PPA? Those are, where do they come from?
Okay.
I thought you said on the previous spreadsheet that the current cost per kilowatt hour was 8 cents. Or am I misunderstanding what those are? Which may well be the case. This is a derived rate dividing the kilowatts by is that a calculated rate, what it would be equivalent to?
Okay, so I was originally given that it costs about 6.5 cents. So this is 6.5 rounded up to 7. Okay. But if you 8, you can see that your savings would be like 2,000 more. So that would be.
And you're saying under the PPA, the township would be only charged 5 cents per kilowatt hour that was generated?
Yeah, that was a number I was given. I think someone else can elaborate more on that.
So under a PPA, we really can't give you a hard estimate of what the cost per kilowatt hour is, because that's going to be negotiated with the investor. But when we were speaking with the independent solar, Keith, he said that 5 cents is a realistic number. It really depends on what sort of return on investment the investor seeks. Because that price is fixed relative to the initiation of the contract. So if the person wants a lower rate of return, they can charge less per kilowatt because they're in less of a rush to recoup their money. So that's a hypothetical number, but that can also be manipulated to fit with an actual offer. But that's just a number we use to sort of visualize this.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also put a tab together that shows the environmental health impacts. So you can see that if you use solar panels, you're going to be reducing your CO2 emissions by about 82 metric tons per year, which is the equivalent of taking about 18 cars off the road, and has a social cost of about $3,000. So there are benefits beyond just saving money on your bill, but that's just something that I put together, but I'm sure you're more focused on this.
Great, thank you. Other questions for the group?
So for this analysis here, is it correct to say that for a PPA, the township would save about $7,500 a year net? That's what you're saying?
Assuming that it's 5 cents per kilowatt, but we don't know what that specific number is.
Right.
But under a 5 cent kilowatt PPA, yes.
And so what is the Scadium, the similar number? Do you have
Yeah.
If both of them are done, what would be the net savings by a PPA?
So this one would be about 9,500, and this one would be about 7,500. So that would be about 17,000, right?
17,000. Okay.
Yes, yeah, about 17,000 a year.
Again, with the proviso that it depends on the details of the PPA, which
Sure.
has a lot of variables. Robert, you'd mentioned this idea that our group hadn't known about of the lease to buy. Could you say a little bit how that works?
Yeah.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. Yeah, I've been doing some work on electric vehicle procurement for municipalities recently, and learned recently that there is a sort of a new strategy that has been used in our region, most recently by Lansdale, where they, is it Montgomery County, I believe, where they they work with a dealer in New Jersey to get, which has a number of vehicles that Pennsylvania doesn't have because they're a ZEB state. And they found a Kia, I can't remember what Kia's electric vehicle is, Kona maybe? And they found a dealer who would lease it to them for a year, give them the full $7,500 tax credit, and then after the year they would sell it. And so then they had full ownership of it after 1 year, but they reaped the benefits of the full tax credit through the lease. And it just seemed as a model that might be possible also for solar panels, where you could lease the solar panels from a company for a year. The company could, and then you could take full possession of them after a year. But it's an interesting model. It's also being used by Columbus in transitioning their fleet from to EVs. They're doing a similar procurement, although they're only getting half the tax credit because they didn't get as good of a deal as Lansdale got. I think the ZEV states are very anxious to get these vehicles sold, so they'll work hard to get the full tax credit for you to sell them. And I don't know whether anything like that works with solar panels, but it struck me when I heard you talking about it. It just struck me as a model that might be might be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a pointed question, and one of the issues, I guess, that solar might pose with a traditional lease is that the project is not just the panels, the racking and the wiring and the inverters and the
yeah. I mean, I don't answer now. It was just an idea to think about.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It just got me thinking about it. So
yeah, it's a great idea, and it definitely has not been introduced in the industry. So
and there may be reasons it's not, as you noted.
Yeah, nonetheless, that's a great point.